The James Show Podcast.
So some terrible news. There was a shooting at an ICE detention center in Alvarado. One Alvarado policeman was hit in the neck. He'll be okay. But there's a couple of concerning parts about this. And number one being the fact that there's 11 people involved in this crime. 10 people charged in the shooting, one person involved in the cover-up after the fact. And that means that this isn't some crazy person, and it's hard to peg this on the right or the left because there's going to be crazy lone wolf actors, and we're just going to have to deal with it. But this is coordination. There's 10 people involved in the initial attack. You know how hard it is to get 10 people to agree on where they're going to go eat lunch, but we have 10 psychos who say, yeah, I like this plan to shoot a cop. Let's do that. This is an incredible level of evil. If you're not familiar with some of the details, this is interim U.S. Attorney Nancy Larson explaining what she knew earlier today.
I tell you that late at night on July 4th, Friday night at approximately 10:37 p.m. at the Prairieland ICE Detention Center in Alvarado, Texas, 10 to 12 individuals dressed in black military-style clothing began shooting fireworks and engaging in acts of vandalism at the facility. And this was part of an organized attack. Today, my office has charged 10 individuals with 3 counts of attempted murder of a federal officer. Each of the 10 are also charged with 3 counts of discharging a firearm in relation to a crime of violence. Each of these defendants faces a mandatory prison term of 10 years and up to life in prison. An additional co-conspirator was charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy for attempting to conceal and destroy evidence in relation to the attack, and he faces up to 10 years in prison. Let's discuss the incident. It was a planned ambush with the intent to kill ICE corrections officers. Make no mistake, this was not a so-called peaceful protest. It was indeed an ambush.
You have a problem. You have a problem, left wing, with your people doing these attacks because it doesn't matter what flavor they are. Almost all of these terror attacks that we have seen, the politically motivated violence, has come from your side. Some of it is anti-ICE people. They're upset about the immigration issue. There's been quite a bit of violence from the pro-Palestinian crowd, the pro-Hamas crowd, where they murdered a couple of Jewish people coming out of the museum in D.C. a couple months ago. There was the guy in Boulder, Colorado, that had the makeshift blowtorch and Molotov cocktails where he was burning elderly Jews, one of them to death. You have the guy who rolled through the crowd on Bourbon Street in New Orleans on New Year's Day, who was doing so because he was incensed and just enraged with your political ideology. Now, it's not 100% left wing. There was the guy in Minnesota that shot and killed a state representative. That was a lone wolf. You can't find 10 of those guys. You can't find 10 of those guys in your entire life. You can find some guy in the 90s that shot an abortion pastor. You can find, I don't know. It really is hard to come by right-wing violence, isn't it? I mean, I guess kind of Timothy McVeigh, but he's not even a Republican. He was just, and you got to go back to the 90s for that. There's been a lot of politically motivated violence from you lefties, whether it's burning Tesla dealerships or keying Tesla cars or... You guys have a real problem over there. And how much violence can be perpetrated by people with Antifa ties before we all get serious and do something about Antifa? Before media, can't you call them a terrorist organization? Shouldn't Donald Trump and the Department of whatever, state or whoever's in charge of that, Homeland Security, shouldn't they put Antifa on the terrorist list? I know that's a big step because, we're in a war on terror. And what are we going to do? Start drone bombing Antifa leaders? No, that's not what I'm calling for. But the first step into getting better is to admitting you have a problem. And to my lefty friends, you have a problem. Now, I'm not blaming all of you because I don't know any of my lefty friends that are okay with this. I have plenty of friends who vote Democrat, call themselves Democrat. And, a lot of them aren't okay with this, They aren't okay with what you heard from Sadie Perkins in the last segment. They aren't okay with an open border. And most of them don't think that men should play in women's sports. So when people talk about, there's a civil war on the right side of the aisle between, the America Party and the MAGA crowd, we don't agree on everything. But if we did have a third party, I think we'd split off a good half of the Democrats as well, because I know they don't like being associated with these people. 800-288-9227, 800-288-9227. Ron, Stephenville, you're on WBAP.
Hey there. Hey, I think with these people, this group should definitely be charged with domestic terrorism, and that would start the ball rolling towards getting all of these people that do these things labeled as terrorists when they do it. They didn't have a problem with anybody being a white nationalist being considered a terrorist, but they're the only ones that are doing it, not us.
Man, I don't know what the argument against that is, Ron and Stephenville. At this point, it feels like it's common sense. Of course, Antifa is a terrorist group. How many terrorist attacks do they have to pull off? Yet they're not a terrorist group, Ron. Some people just don't have the stomach to admit it. And I think on both sides of the aisle, they don't have the stomach to admit it. Because whether it's these guys or like the Luigi Mangione, who shot the CEO of United Health, or, there's just a wave of left-wing violence that we've been sweeping under the rug and acting like, well, it goes both ways. No, it doesn't. My next guest is Chris Putnam, CEO of the Dallas Express. You can find his work, you'll never guess where, dallasexpress.com. Welcome back to the James Show. Lots to talk about with you here. I want to start with the most human story here, the Texas flooding. I don't think we've ever seen anything like that. In our lifetime, have we had a flood in Texas kill more than 100 people?
Not that I'm aware of. In fact, I'm almost to Fredericksburg now to do help sponsor a concert benefit to raise money for the victims' families. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. Obviously, absolutely tragic.
Tell me about your concert. You didn't tell me about this before the show. This is the first I'm hearing about it. What do we need to know?
Yeah, so group of hill country artists, including my really good friend Rich O'Toole, as he happens to live down in Fredericksburg, and so getting together with a lot of other singer-songwriters and tonight, and they're doing it again Friday night in San Angelo. They're doing a number of communities, and the idea is just to raise as much money as possible, and support the first responders, but it all goes to the victims' families.
All right. Well, when we get closer to that, remind me, and we can give it a couple mentions here on the James Show. I know you guys are sick to your stomach at the way some people have responded to this. And, how ugly does politics make some people act? I mean, it's important to have strong political opinions and to be aware of what's going on in the world. But some people have let it turn them into a monster.
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, you've seen use case after use case. We've done a number of stories about it. About these folks. There's the one woman who's just inciting all sorts of racial hatred, which is deeply confusing. Folks are losing their jobs over the awful things that they're saying. The part that's really hard to understand is when you take a hard look at how Texans are responding to this, it's actually really, really positive. Cities of Dallas and Fort Worth, we just did a story this morning, got together, and they're sharing resources to send down here to help folks as well. And then, I also know of a number of other, fundraising and victim relief efforts going on, some sponsored by different churches or church groups. And so this is actually a time to be really proud to be a Texan. We saw it also in the Houston floods, as you'll recall. And it's incredibly sad, that some of these people are just so whacked out that they have to politicize, something that is one of the most incredible tragedies we've ever experienced in this state.
Agreed. We're talking with Chris Putnam from Dallas Express. Let's move to a couple other tragedies here in Texas. We had the attack at the ICE facility in Alvarado on Friday, and I'm kind of surprised at how little attention it got. I didn't really hear of that story until yesterday, and about the same time I was hearing about that, I was hearing about another ICE facility getting attacked in McAllen. Chris, I think we have a problem.
Yeah, I was actually listening to the segment before, and I couldn't agree with you more. We've somehow normalized this political violence, particularly from the left. And it's so ironic, right? Because as you'll recall, in the previous administration, we were lectured to constantly how white supremacy was the greatest domestic terror threat we've seen in this country, and yet there were no actual practical examples of it. We see examples every single day now. And this thing in Alvarado is just crazy. And, we'll also be doing stories on the fact that, the mainstream media is obviously not going to amplify it because, they're indulging it. And by indulging it, you're normalizing it. And I mean, from the Tesla bombings to, pretty much everything else that we've seen here lately with some of these people just going absolutely off the wall. It's just unacceptable. And I'm with you. Let's call Antifa what it is. It's a domestic terrorist organization. They fit the bill more than any of these others that we see, folks like the Southern Leadership Conference, denote as terrorist organizations. I mean, these people are actually out there shooting people, including our president, before he was the president this particular cycle. But it's gotten really, really awful. And it's also very revealing the fact that, as you know, 97% of the what I call the lying legacy media, doesn't report these things. It's not convenient to them or their narrative.
Yeah, and that's ugly to ignore the violence when it comes from political allies, but amplify it when it comes from your political opposition. At some point, hey, media and people who are supporting this and ginning up people against ICE and lying or exaggerating, they're just deporting innocent children, American citizens with no due process and sending them to the worst prisons in the world. At some point, you have blood on your hands.
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, whether it's Karen Bass or again, there's so many examples of elected officials doing it, including leadership. In the Democrat Party, Keem Jeffries. You got Sweet Jasmine. Here in Dallas, it's irresponsible. It's irresponsible. It does nothing to help address polarization. It just makes it worse. And again, are these the fringe elements of the party? Not really. These are a lot of the mainstream elements, of that particular party that are out there, and whether they're doing it subtly or explicitly, inciting violence. You know what?
That's an important point to stick out on too, because if they are a fringe, where are the mainstream Democrat politicians denouncing these people? Well, is The View denouncing them? Is MSNBC denouncing them? Or are they just an accepted part of the left wing as a whole and not a fringe? And I think that's important to point out.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of these voices have national platforms, sadly. And I do think they've normalized it, and to the extent that they've normalized it, they've encouraged it. I saw there's a funny post. I believe it was the Dallas Morning News this morning on X. You should take a look at where they're recognizing the 5 police officers that were killed in the BLM protest in downtown Dallas. And they characterize it as a mostly peaceful protest, except for the fact that 5 police officers were murdered in the street and 9 other people were shot. Well, yeah, that's a perfect example right there.
Yeah, if the BLM rally in Dallas that killed, I think it was 6 of our police officers actually. If that's mostly peaceful, then January 6th is cotton candy. It's the county fair.
Yeah, you got to go see this post because it's one of the most ratioed posts I've ever seen. People are just like, you got to be kidding me. We're still doing this stuff, characterizing these things as mostly peaceful. People were murdered.
All right, we're talking with Chris Putnam from Dallas Express. Keep us updated on the benefit concert and keep doing the good work at DallasExpress.com. I appreciate your time, sir.
Will do. Appreciate all as always, James. Thanks.
Yeah, that's one of my websites. It's on the daily rotation, DallasExpress.com. One of the concerning things surrounding the details in the Alvarado ICE attack, if you haven't heard, 11 people have now caught charges from that, 10 with the actual shooting and ambush itself, and then 1 guy who was involved with the cover-up after the fact. But 10 people, I mean, we say they have Antifa affiliations, but it's not like there's an official membership card that they're carrying around and we found laminated in their billfold. But the plan was go out there, start vandalizing stuff, shoot some fireworks at the ICE facility. And when they come out, there's people waiting in the trees to start shooting at them. Well, they did. 1 cop got hit in the neck. I hear dozens of rounds were fired, but I mean, I guess if you grew up being from the side of the aisle that thinks guns are scary, you must be a terrible shot. I mean, dozens of rounds were fired. You made 1 hit on 1 guy, and it wasn't even center mass. You grazed his neck. Luckily for us, they're terrible with guns. However, you and I both know if there was the string of violence that is associated with our left-wing neighbors that if we saw that coming out from people in a MAGA hat, we'd be having a national conversation about it, wouldn't we? I'm calling for the national grown-up conversation about this left-wing violence problem that we have. I mean, when you just look at this year, and we're only halfway through the year, it started off with the pro-Palestinian protester guy upset, activists about the genocide in Gaza, and he ran through a bunch of our neighbors and murdered a dozen people on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. We had the pro-Palestinian activist of Hispanic background from, I think, Chicago or something, wasn't it? But he murdered 2 Jewish diplomats who were walking out of a museum in D.C., just ran up to him, shot him in the back right in the middle of the street. When the girl was crawling away, he reloaded his gun and stood over her and finished her like an absolute monster. You saw, not only did Luigi Mangione murder the United Health CEO in broad daylight in New York City, how many people you saw, if not outright cheering it on, at least saying, well, I can understand. How many videos have you seen of the ICE protesters throwing bricks at cop cars in Los Angeles? How many videos have you seen of Tesla dealerships being vandalized or cars being keyed? Did you see the videos of the no ICE protesters looting stores, spray painting all over an Apple store and then busting out the window and looting it? We have a real problem, and that's just this year. So I'm not like counting when the GOP baseball practice got shot up by a Bernie supporter in 2017. I'm not counting when Black Lives Matter murdered 6 of our police officers here in Dallas. I'm just talking about this year. Couple problems is there's 10 of them, and they're upgrading their weapons. It's one thing when they're throwing bricks or bottles of pee or whatever gross thing these people do. But these folks were actually shooting guns this time. They had tactical vests on this time. So this isn't some hissy fit tantrum that's being thrown in the street like we're used to. It's getting worse because we're not stopping it right now. We should have stopped it yesterday and the day before, but we didn't. So it's going to keep getting worse. And I know I say this and it sounds obvious, but everyone should be saying this. We need to bring the hammer down now, or this will get worse. This will escalate. That's a terror cell. That's what we have here. And these people are from North Texas. These aren't weirdos from Portland anymore. And these guys are from like Fort Worth and Dallas and Waxahachie, and they're all within the listening umbrella of the WBAP broadcast. So, this isn't carpetbaggers or foreigners coming in here and trying to mess up our society. This is our neighbors doing it. One of the toughest parts about the coverage and the fallout is that you've been told, look out for right-wing death squads. Look out for white rural rage. This is what you were told last year, my MSNBC. There were a couple of nerds that had written this book called White Rural Rage that was warning you. All these Trump-supporting Christian bigots from rural America, they're going to be on the rampage if Trump wins. They're a big problem.
Joining us now, Professor of Political Science at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Tom Schaller, and journalist and opinion writer Paul Waldman. Their new book, out tomorrow, is entitled White Rural Rage, the Threat to American Democracy. And Tom, I'll start with you. Why are white rural voters a threat to democracy at this point? You would think, as we pointed out, looking at Joe Biden's background and Donald Trump's, that the opposite would be true.
I mean, we lay out the fourfold interconnected threat that white rural voters pose to the country. First of all, and we show 30 polls and national studies to demonstrate this. So we provide the receipts in Chapter 6. They're the most racist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant, anti-gay geodemographic group in the country.
Did you hear that? They're basing this off of polls. How about, I'm going to say, no, you know what? A big problem is lefty urban rage, or just lefty rage, period. And I don't have to look at polls. You know what I can use to support my argument that the left is more violent than the right? Here's probably a more important metric, the body count. How about that? How about dead bodies? How about people actually getting shot? How about cars being set on fire? How about Ice Pigs was spray painted on some of these cars in Alvarado on Friday? Yeah, white rural rage. Shut up. The other thing you were told is, right-wing death squads, especially after the Supreme Court did the Trump immunity case, which means Trump is going to have the same immunity protections as every president in American history. They took that as they just inferred that there's going to be death squads running around with white people shooting folks.
It's also scary.
Scary.
What is Trump?
By the way, everyone agrees that Van Jones is in the closet. Anyway.
It's also scary because...
No, I'm sorry. Do any of your straight friends talk like that? It's also scary. That's me doing my flamboyant voice.
It's also scary because what is Trump going to do? If Trump gets elected, that's really, really scary for the public because it's almost like a license to thug in a way. That is very frightening.
I mean, this is a death squad ruling, and this is a president who has activated pro-Trump paramilitary groups that, wear insignia and T-shirts and hold placards celebrating literally right-wing death squads.
The imperial presidency is now concretely here.
And it's a dangerous precedent because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law. All right,
we don't have to hear this whole montage, but you were told, just to refresh your memory, or if you're new to the show, this is what's been fed into your mind pretty much your entire life by the majority of the media. Look out for those evil right-wingers. They sure are violent. You have people that put videos up on TikTok and Instagram saying they're scared to go out in rural America because the people out there are so violent and dangerous and hateful. Really? That's the safest place in America. Go look at all they have maps that you can go Google right now and say, give me the maps, the counties, a map at the county level of places that had 1 or 0 murders last year. It's all rural counties. And you're also tired of hearing about this because there's a steady stream of violence coming from non-MAGA people. In this case, it's anti-ICE people. You also had anti-ICE protesters throwing bricks at cop cars. But you had the pro-Palestinian people, the murdering 2 Jews in D.C., the blowtorch scenario going on. You had all the Tesla dealerships. You had 2 assassination attempts on President Trump. One of them actually hitting his ear with a bullet. Yeah, look out for the right-wing death squads. No, if you people were so worried about this case and right-wing death squad and you're so worried about politically motivated violence, where are you at on this one? Because once we admit, and we all should, I know you do, I know I do, I know Garrett does, I know Mark Levin's going to admit it after this show. I know we all recognize that there's a problem with left-wing political violence, especially Antifa and that whole crew over there. But once you admit that, then you got to ask, well, who's ginning these people up? Where are they getting their ideas? Who is inciting the violence? And anybody who's being hyperbolic about ICE, you have blood on your hands now. Again, you have blood between McAllen and Alvarado. This kind of rhetoric has to stop. Here's Kamala Harris comparing ICE to the KKK.
Ku Klux Klan, the KKK.
Well, the Klan was what we would call today a domestic terrorist group.
Why? Why would we call them domestic terrorist group?
Because they tried to use fear and force to change political environment.
And what was the motivation for the use of fear and force?
It was based on race and ethnicity.
Right. Are you aware of the perception of many about how the power and the discretion at ICE is being used to enforce the laws?
Yeah, compare ICE to the KKK. Yeah, get some people so ginned up against ICE that they start committing acts of violence against them. What does that make you? That you're on the same team as the terrorist, the acting terrorist here. The vice mayor of Cudahy, California, said on a mic last month that gangs need to stand up to ICE. She's inciting violence.
Not for nothing, but I want to know where all the cholos are at in Los Angeles. 18th Street, Florencia. Where's the leadership at? Because you guys are all about territory, and this is 18th Street, and this is Florencia. You guys tag everything up, claiming hood. And now that your hood's being invaded by the biggest gang there is, there ain't a peep out of you.
Yeah, oh, all right. So there you go. You're inciting terror attacks. Go slap some cuffs on these people. I just played you all the evidence. If you said positive things about, I don't know, the Proud Boys or some other right-wing group, and they went out and they were shooting at cops multiple times in the last 4 days, we might have to have a conversation about it.
The James Show Podcast.